Hey, Murray, can you got a second? Is there a way, do you know how to flip this camera? It's on the back side again. To flip it where the cameras are.
Now you're unmuted.
Sorry. No, it's back on the back side again. Okay. Just when I fold it.
That's Aaron. Hi, Steve. Leslie, you're on mute.
Okay, let me call Tom because I think he's on the wrong seat.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm gonna play.
Okay. I believe we're getting a bit of feedback on this, see if we'll freeze ITN.
Leslie, I can't hear you. There you go. There you go.
Hi, Samantha, I hear you twice. I'm not sure if you have a mic on to
Yep, there's a Hi, Tom.
Okay, hang on. Thank you. Okay, good morning.
If you guys don't mind, I was gonna call, do we have Mr. Stanford on? If he's not on, I'm gonna call him real quick and just make sure.
Okay.
All right, give me just a second.
Wait, do
we have to have a quorum for this,
No, because it's a faculty, I know he's planning on attending. He just might have some technical difficulties, so I was gonna give him, a quick call.
okay.
I'm gonna mute.
Sorry, we got crammed in here like this, my day job called, so.
Is everyone's microphone working now without an echo?
Try mine,
Yep,
mine okay?
yep.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
I'm good.
Excellent.
I apologize. I believe that, the Jason Randall and Mr. Stanford and Miss Griffin are all on the wrong link. So if you guys will give me just a minute, I will get them connected. There was a test link that was sent out this morning at 11, and I'm afraid that's what they clicked on. So it'll give me just a minute.
Oh.
Hopefully by the time we get all this figured out, we'll go back to normal.
Wouldn't that be wonderful? I'm texting Gulf Breeze News, who has asked who all is on the screen. So I'm going around clockwise to her right now.
All right, everyone, we're getting that, Jason connected, and, we're getting that phone call into Jean so that she, has the right link. And I just sent Mr. Stanford the link, so he should be on in just a minute. I should keep the camera on the screen that I'm looking at. That might help.
Did you send it to her in an email?
Mm-hmm. I just forwarded it to her. Well, what's a virtual meeting without a few issues?
Video.
Ah, there you are, Mr. Stanford. Good to see you. There's Jason. All right. All right, Chairman, we are ready to go.
Do you call this, or
You'll
do I?
go ahead and call it to order like normal.
Yeah. This is a call to order meeting of a special workshop for SSRUS board. It's Monday, June 29th, 12:10. I have a statement to read that goes with all these Zoom meetings. Pursuant to Executive Order number 20-69, issued by the Office of Governor Ron DeSantis on March 20th, 2020, as extended by Executive Order 20-150, municipalities may conduct meetings of their governing boards without having a quorum of its members present physically or at any specific location, and utilizing communication technology such as telephonic or video conferencing as provided by Section 120.545B2 Florida statutes for members of the council appearing remotely and for public participation. This meeting is being conducted via Microsoft Teams, which allows board members along with a number of key staff to participate remotely. The Microsoft Teams meeting is being videoed and streamed via YouTube live at this link on the city's website, and the link will be posted on the city's Facebook page. I'd now like to ask the clerk to explain the procedures for participation in this meeting. Leslie?
Leslie, you're on mute.
Still mute.
Yep, Leslie, you're on mute.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
All right, let me start over. The following are the city's rules for utilizing communications media technology as provided by Section 120.54(5)(b)(2) of the Florida statutes, as adopted by the City Council on April 6, 2020. This remote meeting is being streamed on YouTube Live, and the link will be posted on the Facebook page. The agenda and backup material in the agenda packet are posted on the city's website. As set forth in the notice for this meeting, also posted last week, members of the public who wish to participate in the meeting were asked to review the agenda and submit their questions or comments on agenda items by email to the city clerk with their name and address and a reference to the agenda item on which they wish to comment. It was also explained in the notice that questions or comments on agenda items could also be mailed directly to the city clerk's attention at the City of Gulf Breeze, 1070 Shoreline Drive, 32561. The city requested that all correspondence be received by 10:00 a.m. Central Standard Time today, June 29th. Anyone wishing to comment in the public forum at the end of the workshop should call in to the following toll-free number, 1-888-585-9008, with a call code of 1-866-319-9955. Hold and your call will be answered in turn. The standard rules also apply, with comments being limited to 3 minutes and applicable to the agenda topic being considered. Thank you.
And so, Mr. Chairman, if it pleases the board, I'd like to just start maybe with a little bit of a memory refresher before we turn it over to Raptelis Consultants. Staff is ready whenever you are.
We're ready.
Okay, all right. So to dive into a bit of a memory refresher, it has been almost a year. It was July 15th when the City Council approved engaging Raptelis Consultants for the purpose of a comprehensive rate study. This has been a culmination of discussions and efforts from the South Santa Rosa Utility Board that certainly predates my tenure with the city. And so I'd like to start from there, where I can speak from personal experience and observations. When I came on board with the city in 2016, our enterprises, there were no enterprises with the city which were self-sustainable. And I want to pause for a minute and talk about what that means. And I know that Nick Smith is going to go further into detail on that. But what it means is that an enterprise fund is a governmental fund that is supposed to be self-sustaining with the fees and charges that it collects, or else there's supposed to be a policy in place that stipulates why it isn't self-funding. And in the city's case, we had to start analyzing those enterprises and issues that had compounded. Some of those issues are just not adjusting annually for inflation. And so the result was that the city's general fund was actually supporting its business-like activities. And that is very unusual. It certainly is something that would trip the trigger for a closer look of policies and procedures. And so the city has gone about doing that. Again, since my tenure, we have looked at the stormwater utility fund by reviewing and overhauling those policies. The stormwater utility fund now covers all operating expenses, and there's a cost share for some major capital projects. That was a big discussion. We had only raised rates in the amount of $1 since 2008, and it was Raftellus Consultants who helped provide us comparison analysis of different practices with stormwater enterprises throughout the state. After that, we took on our solid waste enterprise. And while we were looking at these other enterprises, the South Santa Rosa Utility Board at the same time was telling the city council, look, we've got a problem. And you know that we have a problem. That is that we're deferring maintenance every year, and we have a zero-based budget, meaning that at the end of the year, we have no cash reserves. The timing, as you know, as has been expressed by staff, was just a little difficult because it is really hard to take on more than one analysis of one fund at a time, especially for the city council, who has to look at how all of these kind of tie in together. And so the SSRU has kind of rang the caution bell and has said, if you don't have adequate reserves, that means that we're going to have deferred maintenance, and it means that we're going to have more emergency repairs and more costs. That, in fact, has been the issue. And we've certainly seen that in this last year. You had over $500,000 in just capital maintenance that was deferred. Not all news is bad news, however. The SSRU has done a very good job with some of your long-range capital planning, making sure that you're encumbering funds for projects such as the expansion of your wastewater treatment plant. Some things that are unique, at least in this area, is that the city of Gulf Breeze created this very board as a recommending board to the council on the provision of utilities to non-city customers. And that isn't the case in other areas, even just in Santa Rosa County. So Milton also provides utilities outside its city limits, provides utilities to 3 industrial parks, and yet it doesn't operate 2 different funds. And so part of the analysis with Raftellus is for them to look statewide at different operating approaches to be able to provide back recommendations to the SSRU board. So again, this comes with a lot of anticipation. You have had to kind of wait as we have taken on the analysis of the city's enterprise funds one by one, and we could really give this the time and attention that it deserves. It's a complex issue. The SSRU has been owned by the city since the late 90s, and we are really looking at creating a business plan that will serve the city for at least the next decade into the future. And so I wanted to just, again, start with a memory refresher on that, and then also thank you for the job that you do, because we do think that this is a pivotal time in history, and that the decisions and recommendations that this board will make are going to serve our ratepayers well inside and outside the city for many years to come. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nicholas Smith, who is a certified government finance manager with Raftellus Utility Consultants. This rate study, again, has taken almost a year. The information that they're providing to you has been combed over by staff, several times in order to provide it to you today. The intent of today is not that action be taken, but that it be discussion and it be the platform for future discussions you're going to have this budget session. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Nick. Oh, I think you're still on mute there.
Thank you, Samantha. And I'm actually going to be turning over to Henry. I'm going to be running the presentation in the background, and Henry's going to be doing the speaking for today.
Can you hear me?
I hear you.
Yep.
Okay. My name is Henry Thomas. I'm the Vice President with Reftalis. I have about 40 years in the utility industry and rate setting, and I did direct the project for the city of Gulf Breeze as it related to your stormwater rates. So one of the things I will tell you right off the bat, so to make sure we have the right expectations for today's meeting, is that we've been working diligently to come up with rate proposals and a financial plan over the last year. And as Samantha said, this is a complex undertaking because we're looking at it several different ways. That being said, in the last week or so, a lot of underlying assumptions have changed. For example, in your wastewater treatment plant expansion going forward, it looks like you're going to be eligible for $6 million of restore funds. In addition, in discussing this with the folks that administer the restore funds, there were at least verbal discussions with them about enhancing our septic to sewer conversion within the city. So the current plan had minimal efforts in it over the next few years, and we're going to look at that plan to see what we can do to enhance it. In addition, there's been some agreements made with Holly Navarro for Navarro Beach for some reclaimed sales. All those assumptions, particularly the restore funding and the timing of when those monies will be available, will have major impacts on the study results. We had literally finished our presentation with our preliminary results when we got all this new information. I mean, it happened, literally in one day. And so in discussing this with Ms. Abel, we're going to withhold the projections for now of the rate impacts. I'll discuss them generally with you so that we have a chance to work through all the new assumptions and recast the plan in a meaningful way. Clearly, had we moved forward with the plan as we developed it, the rate impacts would likely be higher than what they're going to be when we update things. But again, relative to those issues, we have to run the numbers to see where we are. So that being said, what we want to do then, since these meetings were already scheduled, is we revised our presentation to share with you kind of the issues we're looking at, what's behind them, the philosophy, what others are doing in the state of Florida, and begin the discussion that will then come back at a later date with some more refined numbers. So today we're going to talk about the study objectives, the management issues you face, how we go about planning for it, where you're at today, existing conditions, and then the various sources of revenue and how you recover them, and then give you a little quick update on where things stand. So we were asked to review the water and sewer business requirements for both the city system and the South Santa Rosa system. That included identifying existing and future operating capital requirements, looking at rate sufficiency. And in looking at rate sufficiency, we were asked to look at it two different ways. One would be the continued approach that's used today to stand alone versus a combined utility operation. We also were asked to review transfer policies related to the general fund and outside city surcharges. And then also identify planning criteria to align the study with financial objectives, including things like proper levels of cash reserves. Once all that was prepared, then we designed the monthly water and sewer user rates. We also reviewed your tap impact fees, if you will, and we evaluated your miscellaneous fees. So the issues that you're dealing with surrounding the overall cost of operations include asset condition, reliability, and so you've got those issues that you're facing because of the deferral of capital maintenance, but also you've got system expansion. The wastewater treatment plant expansion, it needs to be done on a timely and urgent basis, and that itself has been deferred because of lack of funding. Regulatory compliance and governance. Regulatory compliance really relates to the need to expand that plant, which is driven by FTEP rules. Also, the governance that's related to your debt obligations. There are certain factors within those loans that you have to deal with. So the policies we're going to talk about are policies related to financial performance, including policies that go back and are addressed in those bond covenants. And then finally, with respect to your current situation, how you manage and report and plan for the systems. So again, all these issues to some degree are addressed in what we're going to talk about. So with respect to the system expansion and reliability issues, one thing is that utilities are very capital intensive. In addition to the cost of operations, you need to be able to fund capital needs, and this is usually a major driver. And the two types of funding are system expansions, which are typically funded from a combination of impact fees, developer contributions, grants, and long-term debt. And then recurring asset maintenance are replacements and rehabilitation. Now that's typically funded as pay-as-you-go basis. However, given where you are today and your CIP for both systems, if we tried to fund your renewal and replacement projects strictly on a pay-go basis, it would cause significant rate increases well beyond our proposal that we're going to share with you. So what we recommended to the city is city staff is that they consider a one-time, you might refer to it as a working capital loan, but really it's a loan to fund over the next few years a lot of the major reinvestment R&R projects that are on the books that are needed to be done, because if we try to let the rates produce enough cash to do that, again, there'll be major rate increases. So we're the only, if we were in a better position with respect to cash, and we'll go over that, we might be able to phase in things, but strictly speaking, this loan is going to be a phase-in device. And then by the end of the funding period, we would begin to rely more on pay-as-you-go capital and no longer continue to borrow for those asset rehabilitations. So again, you know, there's a competition for funds and revenues. We realize that, you know, the ability to raise rates and keep them affordable is limited. So that's why we're talking about perhaps a loan. And in the first numbers we ran, it was roughly $7 million that would help phase in the rates. Keep in mind that most of those assets that are being funded do have a long life. You know, if we upgrade a substation or a lift station, it's going to have a long life, and at least by using the loan, it's going to be paid for over time instead of right away. So, you know, the city faces all sorts of governance and compliance issues. Water Management District, Florida Department of Environmental Protection, they're really the agency that's looking at your capacity utilization and telling you that if you're going to continue to grow, you need to expand the wastewater plant. EPA, which has overall responsibility for your operations and making sure that they're environmentally sound. The city council, the advisory board. I know that there's a finance committee. I'm not sure we're going to go through them, but that's certainly another committee that the council uses. And then finally, any bondholders or lenders have some governance issues relative to utilities. So the guidelines for the business process are to develop, these are very general, develop financial policies and covenants that promote financial stability, creditworthiness, and system sustainability. We want to establish some minimum targets and goals, and some of that is what we want to talk to you about today. This will give guidance to management so that they understand what the policy group wants out of them, and then they can make plans to meet those objectives. And typically financial performance looks at the balance sheet or cash reserve levels, the income statement, the cash flow statement, and from that cash flow statement, debt service coverage compliance. And as you know, whenever you borrow money, the lender wants you to have available revenues in excess of operations sufficient to pay debt, and then a number that's a little higher than that debt. And you can look at that coverage markup to say that they want to make sure you have enough money to pay the debt. But in reality, those coverage requirements also ensure that you have funding to reinvest in the system so that you can maintain a going concern. So to some degree, it's about the lender wanting you to be conservative to make sure you can pay your debt, but you can use those funds that the coverage generates to reinvest in the system. With respect to the management financial planning, management, operational, and strategic planning. So one of the things that your management's involved with today is managing this dual system, and we'll talk a little bit about how they come up with each enterprise's requirements. Again, rate covenant is part of financial planning. We have to comply. If not, the lenders can impose certain limitations on us. We're going to talk about financial management goals and how the rates accomplish that. With respect to rates, we're going to tell you what each system would require to stand alone versus what a rate would look like on combined utility operations, with some issues that have been introduced there regarding transfers to general fund and outside surcharges. The rates need to be based on various levels of service, and in particular, that relates to your tap fees / impact fees, as well as the base charges and the usage charges. Also, again, we look at fixed costs within the rate structure or within the cost structure, and variable costs. And while we can't really charge a fixed charge per month equal to fixed costs, because typically in utility operations, about 80% of your operating costs are fixed. And if we charged a rate that recovered 80% of that in a fixed charge, it would not be affordable for smaller users, and it's not a standard utility practice. But we do want to have sufficient fixed cost recovery so that we have some rate stability and that the revenues don't vary a lot depending on things such as rainfall that impacts usage. And finally, we want to make sure that the rates are affordable and they're equitable to all the parties that pay the rates. So this just real quick is, at the center are all these business and policy goals. We're going to develop a financing plan, a cost recovery plan, which is how we either borrow to fund costs or use tap fee, impact fees, or rates, or grants. Then finally, we'll have a pricing structure, and the financial plan in large part is driven by the capital improvement plan. So those are the elements, again, that we're looking at to define the system costs. So let's talk about the existing operating conditions for the two systems. So right now you have two separate enterprise funds. There's the Water and Sewer Fund, which is the city of Gulf Breeze. There's the South Santa Rosa Utility System. It was acquired in 1999. It includes reclaimed water service, and it serves outside city limits. The two enterprise funds maintain separate budgets, capital plans, debt obligations, rates. Really, the separate enterprise fund accounting is essentially an allocation process. In our view, and based on the research we've done, the two systems are essentially operated as a single system. The maintenance and administrative personnel are allocated between the systems. You have one maintenance department, and those costs then get allocated. You have a single supplier for both water systems, which is the Fairpoint Regional Utility System, and you have a single wastewater treatment facility that serves both service areas. The city's treatment facility was closed in 1992. There's joint staffing. The plant is nearing capacity and requires expansion to meet additional demands. Most of those demands for growth are happening outside city limits. But you take the cost of these operations, and to get to your two separate systems on an enterprise basis, you essentially have a lot of allocation factors. Now, it was not part of our scope to look at those allocation factors and try to determine if there was a better one for various costs. So when we look at the costs of operations on a standalone basis, we're projecting costs based on your current approach to those enterprise allocations. Then obviously the other alternative is to see what happens if we combine the two systems together, which is essentially, in our view, how they operate. So this just is a service area map that shows the city water and the SSRU water. The city water is the dotted area. The SSRU water to the right on the map is the dashed portions of the service area. If you go to the wastewater, you can see that the city sewer is very limited, but it's a fairly large area, but not as many customers. And then most of the system for wastewater is SSRU sewer system. So that's just, again, maps that I'm sure you all have seen many times. So we've calculated rates for each system. And again, I'm not going to get into that today because I think all that is probably going to change. But you've been doing that. You did a study in 2012 that did that. It recommended inflationary rate increases every year. I believe you've been doing that for the most part. The utility rates were the same for both systems for 2000 to 2006. And this just shows the rate history. To the left is the dollar. This is a 5,000 gallon bill, which is your typical consumption. And it just shows the charges for that 5,000 gallons, with the dashed line being the SSRU system and the green line being the city system. So here are the rates today. This is shows the base charge per meter size. Most residential customers are based on that 3/4 inch meter. And you can see that SSRUS has higher base charges in general than the city. And then the usage rate for the city, water and sewer. And as you can see on the usage side, the city has lower rates. So again, slightly higher base charges than SSRU, slightly higher user rates as well. In addition, you do have the 6% outside city surcharge on the SSRUS rates, but those monies do go directly to the city's general fund. So the next one, go back, Nick, I'm sorry. The next one is the impact fee. You call it a tap fee. We're going to discuss this in a little more detail. It's for city water, it's $1,900 per new connection or development based on a 3/4 inch meter. That goes up as the meter size goes up. $5,200 for sewer. The sewer plant is the same plant, There is a slightly higher impact fee for SSRUS water at $22.50, but the impact fees for sewer are both $5,200. Now, I'm going to get into this in a little more detail, but impact fees typically recover the cost of treatment capacity and system-wide transmission or large conveyance service. So it's not supposed to collect the cost of on-site facilities, mains that run in neighborhoods and developments. It's typically done to collect system capacity costs related with treatment and transmission, the bulk carrying pipelines, if you will. So this is just a comparison. We wanted to show where the city of Gulf Breeze existing rates are versus your surrounding community. This is inside city rates, so this is the city of Gulf Breeze. You can see that this average is based upon Panhandle utilities from our rate database. Again, throughout the Panhandle from the eastern to the western portion, you know, we've got Bay County in there, but we've also got ones closer to you like Milton. The average is $77.41. The current city rate is $72.85. Oh, I also point out that comparison, go back, Nick, real quick. We do not reflect any utility taxes on the inside city rates. The city customers do pay a 10% utility tax over and above this, but since, again, when we look at rates, that money goes directly to the general fund and it is a utility tax. It's not a utility rate. So this is a rate to rate comparison exclusive of any utility taxes. The next one shows the outside city rates, which would be the SSRU rate, to other communities' outside city rates, as well as, for example, we have in here, where's the, okay, we don't have the county in here. So here, the SSRU rate is $83.96. The average of the outside city rates for your other utilities in the survey is $95.94. And we'll talk a little bit about why that may be. So this is impact fees that are charged. And here, you know, you have a very substantial impact fee compared to Panhandle utilities. The water and wastewater fee combined for the city is $7,100, and for SSRUS is $74.50. This does help growth pay its own way, and it helps over time to impact the user rates in a way that they're not being asked to subsidize growth. That being said, in the Panhandle, the average is more like $3,900. So we talked about existing operations and some of your rates that are in place today. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the financial condition you find yourself in. So you did increase your rates for both systems for fiscal 2020 based on the Consumer Price Index. Those rates were not adequate to fund annual operating, transfer, and capital requirements of the system. What happened is, when I say requirements, the rates as set resulted in deferral of needed capital improvements and expansions. So again, without a rate study and only using the index that had been adopted, when staff put together their capital plan in particular, they had to recognize the limited revenues and not necessarily all your needs. The existing cash reserves were not adequate to fund those shortfalls. Starting unrestricted cash balances for the city was $28,550, and for SSRUS, $357,000. Both of those balances are significantly deficient in my view. We'd like to see something on the order of 120 to 150 days of unrestricted balance. As we said earlier, Utilities are capital intensive. Given that, and given the need to sometimes phase in a rate, maybe during a recessionary period, it's always good to maintain some unrestricted reserves. Moody's, which is one of the credit rating agencies, in their Moody's medians, they cite over 200 days as the median number for most utilities. So because of this, historically, the low amount of reserves and the rate increases only at inflation, it's required from time to time transfers from the general fund to meet any shortfalls in year-to-year operations. The capital improvement plan. Here I'm going to talk about the combined systems because the vast majority of it is the wastewater treatment plant. So you've got a 6-year capital plan and it totals $46.7 million. 25.8 of that is the wastewater treatment plant expansion. The majority of inside city capital was unfunded in fiscal 2020 adopted budget. They did not have the money to do that. These include capitals for system renewal and replacement and other improvements. The capital deferrals anticipated to be necessary without rate adjustments. Many projects are not able to be funded through impact fees. And we're going to talk about that, but generally state law requires that you only use impact fees to fund capital expansion. So it's the capital cost of expanding the utilities to serve new growth. If you've got a lift station that's failing, you cannot fund that replacement of that lift station with impact fees. Now, if you upsize it, you may be able to partially fund it, but you have to, if you're doing line replacements and lift station improvements and other renewal and replacement, including renewal and replacements to the plants, you cannot fund that through impact fees. It has to link to an increase in capacity available to serve new growth. So in our mind, to fully fund the CIP at the $46.7 million, you will need to issue debt, primarily for the wastewater treatment plant, but also I've mentioned to you that we'd like you to consider this $7 million loan early on to kind of help us catch up with our capital needs and phase in rates over a period of time to address that. Now, the other big thing that will help is if we can get $6 million in restore funds. That's a significant amount of that $25.8 million wastewater treatment plant expansion. But for example, when we were working to have you a proposal for this week, a preliminary proposal, we had in the impact fees the funding of the full $25.8 million. If we get a grant, that's another thing that we have to net that grant cost out before we calculate the impact fee. So those are the kind of changes that will have to be made in the plan to factor in the availability of this restore grant. So the treatment plant expansion is based upon FTE requirements. They look at your utilization. You cannot really continue to serve new growth without expanding the facility. It was previously delayed due to the inability to meet the projected debt service coverage associated with project funding. We're proposing that this loan be done through the state revolving loan fund. They have very low interest rates today. Most of the wastewater plant expansions and projects that I'm seeing funded from SRF, the interest rate is less than 1% per year. So it's a very good source for funding wastewater treatment facilities. I think we recently worked with the city of Apopka, and they were looking in the bond market at interest rates a little over 2% at the time, up to 3%. And with SRF, you were able to fund it at, I think it came out to 0.58 of 1%. The other thing that SRF lets you do is you don't issue all the debt up front. You use the monies and then get reimbursed so that you don't accumulate interest as quickly. You're not required to pay the monies back, fully amortize it until 6 months after the end of the project. And if you're within the project and you it costs you less than anticipated, you don't have to borrow the full amount, whereas with bonds, you have to borrow an amount and kind of live with it. Also, if you come up short and the project costs end up being higher, it's very easy to amend an SRF loan to get more money once the project's been approved. So the other potential funding we're looking at, and this is one of the big curves that we got thrown, is the restore funding of $6 million. The timing of the receipt of these funds will affect funding strategies for plant expansion and other projects because we have such low cash balances to work with. So we need to know more about the restore project. We can't just assume that $6 million will be available from day one. We need to do a little bit of due diligence and find out what that might look like so we can factor it into the rate and financial plan. The plant expansion, again, I mentioned, it will reduce impact fees relative to if you didn't have that money, but that's a good thing. You're saving new customers money because you got a grant in lieu of borrowing the entire $25.8 million. The additional grant funding and revenues from growth will provide, the grant funding will have great benefits, but also once we fund the project, there will be benefits from having an expanding customer base. So I want to talk a little bit about revenue sources and some things that I see in your current approach that I would do differently based upon my experience here in Florida, and what we see going forward that we think we should make you aware of at this time. So restricted sources, these are funds that impact fees being a primary one, you have to put those fees in a fund, isolate them. You would need to have, if you maintain two enterprises, you'd have a city water and sewer fund, and you'd have a South Santa Rosa water and sewer fund. If we combine them all, you'd have to have a water and sewer fund. You can't spend water impact fees on sewer projects. You can't spend sewer impact fees on water projects. Also, when we fund these new septic to sewer, we have to be careful that how we use the impact fees there as well. So again, impact fees are, we're going to talk in more detail, but they're governed by state statutes. The other is grants. Obviously, if you receive a grant, that's a restricted source and has to be used as intended. Special purpose taxes are sometimes restricted based upon the tax and the community in question. Investment income derived from all the restricted funds has to stay in those funds. So your unrestricted sources are monthly user fees and charges, miscellaneous customer fees and charges, and investment income on those unrestricted funds. Of course, as we've said, you don't have a lot of those available. So right now your interest income will be minimal at best. Non-cash revenues are contributed capital and assets donated from new development. So for example, assets such as on-site facilities that a developer may put in to tie into your water mains or wastewater mains, and then they take those lines directly to customer facilities. Those are typically paid for by development and donated to the utility. And it's really it's counted for in the financial statements as a contribution to native construction. So one other thing I want to mention on the impact fees themselves is that, again, if you do have grants, they have to be netted out. And again, we have to very carefully use them properly. And right now, I believe that what the system has, and we'll go into this in a little more detail, but you have what I would call, it's a hybrid. It's called a tap fee. The cost of tap is in my experience, is the physical cost of tapping into the line in front of the home or business. So there's a cost associated with cutting into that line and tapping. That generally, and for your system, we've calculated about $850. Well, that's far less than the $7,000 plus you're charging between the two systems. So I would submit to you that the difference is, in a sense, a impact fee, or also sometimes referred to as a capacity fee. There's no way to get to $7,000 otherwise. So this just, highlights the fact that we are in deficiency right now, and that the cost of operation and maintenance, debt service payments, recurring capital fund rates, transfers to the general fund, any attempt to build up working capital or meet compliance that isn't already met by your recurring capital needs are the gross rate revenue requirements. When we look at expansion of capital costs funded from impact fees and debt, really built into the debt payments, that equals your total expenditure requirements. So the main revenue sources you have are rate revenues, impact fees, and miscellaneous revenues. The main expenditures are operations and maintenance, debt service, internal capital, and transfers to the general fund. So again, our intent for monthly user rates is to develop a set of rates that the systems continue to stand alone versus combined. We're also, within the monthly user rate analysis, looking at the funding of any transfers to the general fund or general fund requirements, and also the outside city surcharge. So right now, with respect to general fund issues, you do have the utility tax that's authorized by Florida statutes. It cannot exceed 10% of water service. It's not charged to sewer service. The city currently does charge a 10% utility tax. That goes directly to the general fund. So the administrative cost allocation within your operations, the water and sewer systems could not stand alone as budgeted without the services provided to the general fund for administrative expenditures. And examples of those expenditures would be human resources, finance, management. If you had private systems, they'd have to have a human resource department, they'd have to have upper management, and they'd have to have IT expenses. So this is kind of a shared allocation of costs that are captured within the general fund and allocated to all the enterprise funds, including solid waste and stormwater. So the city has a formula for doing that, and they spread those costs. And under governmental accounting rules, these are treated as operating expenses. To do the allocations, you can use various criteria: the number of employees, total expenditures, number of computers for IT. There's a lot of basis for this, and systems typically do an allocation study to determine the administrative cost allocation from general fund to the enterprises. The city does currently charge an administrative cost allocation to both systems. Finally, outside city surcharge. This is authorized by the Florida statutes. The statute provides that it cannot exceed 25% of rates and fees to customers outside the city limits. City currently charges a 6% outside city surcharge. However, the revenues don't stay within the utility system. They're transferred to the general fund. What I will tell you is that the vast majority of municipal systems in Florida charge a 25% outside city surcharge because they can under Florida statutes, but then they also keep those monies within the fund to hold down rates for all customers. So they don't transfer it to the general fund. They use it to help pay the cost of utility operations. So this is the quotes from the statute. Any municipality operating water sewer system outside the boundaries shall charge consumers outside the boundaries determined in one of the following manners. It may charge the same rates and fees charges as consumers inside the boundaries. However, in addition thereto, they may add a surcharge of not more than 25%. Fixing of such rates and fees and charges in this manner shall not require a separate public hearing except as provided for service to consumers inside the municipality. So it's one public hearing. Now, what they're really talking about there is if the city elects to charge higher than 25%, they have to have a study that justifies that on a cost basis, and that study has to be presented and adopted in a public hearing. So basically, state law allows for the 25%, up to 25%, without any additional public hearing other than the one that adopts the rates, the underlying rates that both inside and outside pay, absent the surcharge. So what we did is we looked at the general fund transfer policies of some of your neighboring cities. We asked, is a utility tax or outside surcharge charged to customers? And then we asked to describe any other transfers to their general fund. So we're going to share those survey results with you. So this is the general fund transfer survey results. The ones going direct, it relates to the utility tax. And you can see that Milton and Panama City Beach and Springfield do not charge a utility tax, but Callaway, Fort Walton Beach, Niceville, and Valparaiso all do. You can see that they're all charging the statutory limit of 10%. Outside city surcharges, all the systems in the survey other than Niceville and Springfield have outside city surcharges. To be honest with you, I'm not just certain to what extent that Niceville and Springfield serve outside the city, but you can see that Gulf Breeze again has the 6% surcharge. Everyone else that charges it other than Valparaiso charges the 25 surcharge. Fort Walton Beach does not charge a surcharge for sewer. And then the question is whether they're kept in the utility fund. And the answer is yes for everyone but Gulf Breeze and Valparaiso. So the indirect cost allocation, that's the operating expenses that the general fund provides services to the utility, and it's based on that. And in this case, Panama City Beach does not have a indirect cost transfer. But everything else, everybody else does. Generally, the basis is a detailed allocation plan. In the case of Callaway, it's employees. They just take the number of employees and allocate between general fund departments and enterprise departments. So if your enterprise is 10% of the overall employees, you get 10%. Generally, allocation plans are more detailed than that. Whether it's formally adopted, in many cases, that answer is yes. And whether they did a study or not, you can see that in the most case, it's yes. So again, general fund transfers. So we talked about surcharges, we talked about indirect cost allocations, but it's also legal for utilities to charge a general fund transfer. It's referred to as payment in lieu of taxes, payment in lieu of franchise fees. I've seen it referred to as return on investment. But essentially, this is a charge that is taken from utility rates and goes directly into the general fund. And as you can see, the city of Milton has one. They call it payment in lieu of taxes. It generates about $106,000 in revenues for them. And then with respect to payment in lieu of franchise fees, Fort Walton Beach has one, nobody else has one. And they do that as 6% of revenues. I would tell you, while that's a panhandle survey throughout the state, that the practice is generally to transfer I guess these are ones which just would be called general fund transfers, not referred to as pilot or PLOF. So here, Callaway occasionally makes a transfer. It's discretionary. Fort Walton Beach does not. Milton, Niceville, Panama City Beach, Springfield, and Valparaiso do. And all of them, except for Valparaiso, are just discretionary. Valparaiso does it as a percent of revenues. So again, part of this is the pressure on general funds, particularly in recent years with housing values declining. My client, for example, the city of Titusville, never had a transfer to the general fund. And in recent years, they've started one and they've actually increased it a couple times. In my view, discretionary is not the best practice. It should be established as a fixed amount. One, having it be discretionary is not a good metric for the rating agencies. They get a little nervous when cities can just sweep the fund and take what they want to balance their budget. And I think it's the city of Fort Lauderdale that's had a lot of problems, and they're trying to get loans to correct it. And the state's telling them that they had too many transfers out of the general fund that were too discretionary. And that so they're reluctant to loan them money to fix things. So if you have a set policy with a fixed number, that's the best practice. So again, just putting them all on one chart as to who has what. This just says, it talks about the utility tax, the outside surcharge for water sewer, the indirect cost allocation, and whether there's another general fund transfer, pilot, POF, or other. So other than the utility tax, which goes to the general fund, it really isn't a utility revenue. It's strictly a tax. Gulf Breeze does have that. It goes to the general fund. They do have surcharges of 6%, but those also go to the general fund. And then they have an indirect cost allocation, which is from the general fund to the enterprise funds. So again, you can kind of just look this over, but in most cases, the systems have the surcharges and the indirect cost allocations and another form of transfer to the general fund. So I want to talk to you a little bit about capacity and impact fees, because what we saw the systems doing in the city of Gulf Breeze and South Santa Rosa is a little unique in our experience. But I want to start by talking about what we're really talking about here, because you don't refer to them as impact fees. But I think, again, whether you name it an impact fee or not, it functions like an impact fee. And I do believe it would be subject to the statutes. So it's a fee paid by new development only, not users. And it is collected at the time that the new development gets its permit. Cannot be collected before then. That's one of the recent changes to the state law. It's a capital revenue source restricted to fund the capital cost of capacity increases to serve new development. So you can't use it for capital to deal with deficiencies. It's got to be about capacity increases. Now, if you have existing plant with capacity to serve new growth, or a transmission system with capacity to serve new growth, you can recoup that growth-related portion of that capacity. So many systems don't have a next treatment plant like you do for the wastewater system. So we're recouping the investment that was made in the past to serve then current demands plus future growth. We believe you currently have a hybrid fee. It really functions as an impact fee and a tap fee. You call it a tap fee. Impact fee cost consists of system treatment and transmission capacity, as I said. Tap fee costs consist of physical connection to the system, i.e. tapping into the line. We're recommending that you have two separate fees. You have an impact fee and a separate tap fee. One thing is that impact fees are a restricted revenue source, while tap fees are treated as other operating revenue. And even though there's a cost to tap, when you collect the fees, you don't have to account for them and you can use them any way you want. Impact fee criteria from the Florida statutes. It applies to cities, counties, and special districts. It requires the calculation of impact fees to be based on the most recent and localized data. We can't just do it by comparing to our neighbors or whatever we think is appropriate. It has to be developed in a rigorous manner through calculations and data. It provides for accounting and reporting of the funds in a separate fund. So they have to be maintained in separate funds. You can have an administrative charge, but that has to be limited to the actual cost of collection of the fees, which most impact fees don't include this because it's fairly minimal, because it's part of the permitting process anyway. It requires 90 days notice before imposing a new or increased fee. So if you're lowering it, the point is that if the council commission, if they adopt a fee, they cannot put it in place for 90 days to give the developers a chance to absorb the fee into their inventory costs for the sale of homes. This was again something that was put in the statutes a few years back at the behest of developers because they didn't want the fee to be applied to a new house they were already building but hadn't permitted yet. So it gives them a 90-day grace period. It requires that the city file an annual affidavit with the Auditor General stating that the city has complied. So your finance director is supposed to make this compliance statement in your financial statements each year. And again, the most recent version of this bill says that you can't collect the fees before the time of permitting. And it also codifies recognized case law, which a lot of impact fee criteria was developed through lawsuits and case law, that at a minimum, there needs to be a rational nexus or link between the proposed fee and the benefit accruing to new growth. The Florida case law is something that's been around since the fees were first implemented over 30 years ago. It's based, the fee, the legality of the fee even before the Impact Fee Act, which was adopted in 2006, was home rule. And it said, but the case law said the fee must be it must be reasonably equitable, not perfect, but reasonable. There should be no intentional windfall to existing users. So we can't set the fee up so that it covers more than the cost of new capacity and therefore benefits the existing users. On the other hand, by having new users pay their cost of capacity, it helps prevent existing users from subsidizing them. It's used to recover capital costs for system capacity necessary to serve new development. Upgrades and improvements are borne by all users, including new growth. Operating expenses cannot be included in the impact fee. There needs to be an adoption of an ordinance or resolution that sets the fee as well as restrictions on the use of funds. We look at the cost methodology in developing fees. We look at the cost of supply, treatment, and backbone transmission. These are considered system costs. All new customers generally benefit. It excludes local or on-site water distribution, wastewater collection. These are generally funded through line extension fees or assessments or paid for by developers and donated to the utility. And it should be based upon assets that are not only new expansion assets, but you can include assets with available capacity to serve new growth. Miscellaneous charges. Those charges are intended to recover the costs of ancillary services, new account fee, backflow test fee, meter connection fee, turn on, turn off service, reconnection. And as you can see, I highlighted tap fee. That's typically a miscellaneous charge. Again, when we did the analysis, which has to be updated for the $6 million Restore grant, the tap fee, the impact fee actually was lower than the current tap fee. But when you added in the $850 tap fee we calculated, the combined two fees were actually slightly higher than what you're charging today. So by going to this approach, you'll get the same revenue. A part of it will now be unrestricted, and it'll be more in conformance with standard utility practice here in Florida and state law. So the status of the rate study right now is that we did develop a preliminary forecast, but the potential Restore funding, the septic to sewer conversion programs looks to be evolving, and the interlocal reclaimed water agreement all will impact this. Your existing water and wastewater rates and cash reserves are not adequate to meet the projected revenue requirements of the system over the study period. You will need rate adjustments, and we'll have to look carefully at the Restore funding to determine what's going on there. Now, I will tell you, do we have a chart 41 there? Is that okay? So I will tell you this: where we're headed on the combined system operations, because this is important for the folks on this board to know, is that we want to build in to the overall rates that will be paid by both SSU and city customers a 6% transfer to the general fund. So both inside and outside will pay that 6% transfer. The other thing we've been asked to do is add a 25% surcharge, as the law will allow, to the outside city South Santa Rosa rates, which will then be kept within the utility system. So it will be used to help pay for all costs, both inside and outside, if you will. Now, the fact of the matter is to blend all these together into a combined rate. If you remember the chart on rate history and the rates, SSRUS's rates are already higher than the city rates. So what we had to do is to get to a common rate that both systems would pay. We had to lower the SSRUS rates, but then you add on the 25% surcharge, and at least on the first pass, the first year to affect this change would mean that there isn't a 25% increase in SSRU. It was more like 11%. The city rate inside was going up at about 3%. So I wanted to let you know that, because when you see these numbers again, they're going to be a little different, but those are the concepts that we've been asked to apply to the combined system operations. And I'll say this, the vast majority of municipal systems in Florida do have a transfer to the general fund. 6% is a pretty common and typical number, and they do have the outside city surcharge of 25%. So that's at this point, and I forgot to say, ask me anything as we go, but I can go back and if you have questions on any of these topics, and hopefully we'll get some more information on the Restore funding, on what we want to do with the septic to sewer conversions, what we want to do with the reclaimed agreement and how that's going to affect things. And we'll be bringing back to you a more definitive rate proposal. Things just evolved quickly, and we didn't think it was reasonable to bring a bunch of proposals to you when everything was changing.
Thank you, Henry. That is a lot of information, but I think that Henry and his team did a great job of kind of taking us along and really diving into the details to tell the story of the current conditions and also provide a good comparison. Chairman Nail, I don't see your picture. Are you there?
I'm here. I was just thinking lower into my chair, probably. Sure.
Okay. Well, good. One more thing I just wanted to touch on before we turn it over to the board, for discussions and questions based on, what you've heard, is that Of course, annually we have our independent audit. And going back to the fact that there is a need and we know we can't keep doing what we have been doing, is that in addition to the deferred capital maintenance and replacement program, we also have an accumulated $1.2 million in debt from the SSRU to the city, meaning that year after year, prior to 2016, the general fund at the end of the year, the South Santa Rosa was not able to pay all of its invoices, and so the city council was approving budget amendments in order to make those payments. And so we stopped that in 2016, which means that that's an accumulated debt that continues to show on our books. In addition to that, there was not a reimbursement for the administrative cost provided by the general fund to the SSRU. And so the SSRU just has not been able to foot the cost. And so, obviously we know that we can't keep doing what we're doing if we're going to have a healthy utility and rate plan inside and outside. But I did want to just make that point, because I know that our rate customers, that are non-city customers, have questioned the rate a lot and have questioned the fairness of the rate. And I don't think that they realize that our general fund has in fact been subsidizing the South Santa Rosa utility fund and not the other way around. And I touched on that a little bit in our staff memo. In 2016, we did stop that practice, but it was what exacerbated the issue in the SSRU, is when the general fund isn't paying those bills, then simply those capital needs are just not being met. So I did want to point that out, and then I'll turn it over to Chairman Nail and the board.
Well, thanks for that. For general questions, just one thing on my plate here, I guess, is if we were looking at combining the two, what's the approximate turnaround time on that?
Well, Gene Griffin is listening on the phone, but that is a software endeavor as well. And so there were a lot of steps that would need to take place to do that. The goal last year, when you look at your budget that you adopted, it states right in the adoptive memorandum that this is not a 12-month budget. This is an austere budget, not intended for 12 months, but the South Santa Rosa Utility and City Council engaged Raftellus in order to bring back a new business plan that we had every intention of doing before we got to this point. Unfortunately, because of the state audit, we were not able to do that. We were so busy providing information to state auditors that we weren't able to provide that information to our own consultants in order to fix that problem. So now we have a time compression issue. I think going into the budget this year, what SSRU can expect is you're going to see almost a temporary budget for the first few months that, again, does not factor into needed revenue. It will just have that CPI increase, but it will allow our finance director, Gene Griffin, and her staff, as well as the city attorney and the city council, to start adopting some of the new ordinances which will be needed in order to provide, the legal and policy foundation for these two consolidated utilities, if in fact we move forward. And I'll just give you a couple for instances. As I shared at the beginning of the meeting, there is no statutory requirement for a recommending citizen-led body to review utility matters for the city council. The SSRU was created, simply because the city of Gulf Breeze wanted input from its non-city customers. We think that has served us really, really well. And what staff would propose is that we broaden SSRU's responsibilities to include city matters as well. I think that this board does a great job at your roles and responsibilities, and you're already comprised of city and non-city appointees. And so we would need to amend that ordinance in order to make it clear your function then would be making recommendations on city and non-city utility matters. I think that would also be favorable because it would show the equity in the regional utility. And then also the impact fees that you had Henry talk about, that right now we have a hybrid impact fee that includes tap fees and a capacity fee. The statute requires that we have underlying data and analysis, and that is a big undertaking of what Raftellus has done. So we need to adopt that ordinance as well as other policies in creating this new account. So I don't know that we would be able to do all of that by September 30th. What we would be able to do is adopt a temporary budget with recommendation of the SSRU, and then be working towards that. And within 60 days of adoption of the new budget, hopefully come back with a amended budget that shows this new account. Does that answer your question?
Yes, mostly. It looks like we should be directing staff to basically almost run two budgets.
Yes, that is what, right now, that is what Jason and his team are doing. And also not having a crystal ball, ultimately what SSRU and the council will decide. So we're running two budgets.
Samantha, this is Henry Thomas. If I could add, essentially in doing the combined system analysis, it is the sum of the two budgets historically and projected forward. I don't think there's anything, once we get revised numbers and we fully understand the impact of restore funding and such, I don't think there's anything to prevent the city council from having a combined rate system while you concurrently develop the combined accounting system. I don't think you don't have to necessarily have the separate accounting or the combined accounting to adopt a combined rate.
Noted, yes.
As far as the 7 million, at what part of the timeline are we allowed to apply for that? Do we have to wait until we become combatant, or do we do it at some point?
Yes, the SRF loan applications open, I believe, and Henry, you might correct me on this, but I think twice a year. You can't just apply anytime that you want to. So we would need to time that, as I'm sure this board remembers, with the SRF loan that we're applying for the expansion of the treatment plan. But, those SRF loans, they're created for situations such as this. As you heard Henry say, the 20-year amortization and the very low interest. And so you are spreading that cost across, those future ratepayers by doing so.
Samantha, if I could add in on that one, and I'm going to ask Nick to confirm for me, because all this we've been through a lot of numbers lately, and I don't want to make a mistake. But the 25.8 million is assumed to be an SRF loan. I believe the 7 million, which is something that we actually show being needed in fiscal year 2021, is a bank note that we assume, okay. And it's a little shorter amortization. However, I would suggest to you that in dealing with the bankers, you just pledge both revenue streams for now. So I think you could actually apply for the loan ahead of, one, they're going to want to know the rates are being adopted to pay it back, because right now you couldn't afford the loan. So we need to get the rates adopted. Nick, am I correct on that we assumed it was a bank note?
That is correct.
Okay. So it gives you don't have as soon as you're ready to adopt the rates, you can start putting in for the bank note. And Nick, what was the amortization period on the bank note?
15 years.
So we didn't want to extend it too long, because keep in mind, it's kind of a catch up for all the past deferred R&R and that's built into the budget that we couldn't otherwise afford to pay directly from rates.
Okay. Well, thank you for that clarification. And Chairman Nail, that's very similar to what we just did with stormwater. So we had to first adjust the rate, and that was backed, by the City of Gulf Breeze and also the Stormwater Fund. And then we shopped for the best rates and provided that to the council. So that would be the same here with the conventional loan.
Ideally, we would not want to borrow that money, but again, if we took that path, the rate increases we're looking at would be extreme. So we need to have a bridge to get us back on a more normalized operations. And in our mind, that bridge is that $7 million loan. That means we don't have to keep deferring projects, and yet we can, over time, we'll only use 7 million. In the future, we'll fund those renewal programs on a pay-go basis, which is what they should be funded on. Ideally.
And Henry, one thing to add in is we also assumed some flexible terms, capitalized interest or interest-only payments. So even though the debt is issued in 2021, the full debt payment isn't paid in 2021.
Right. So we got, again, working with your banking community, we think you can do this and it'll have a real benefit to you both in operations and holding costs down.
I think there are certainly some long range things here and some short range. My concern about how quickly we could get our hands on the 7 million has to do with getting away from the deferred maintenance and catching up, basically.
Yeah, so again, I would submit to you, once the new rates are adopted, whether it's on a standalone, continued standalone, or on a combined, that would then put you in a position to go get that loan.
Okay. I'm kind of hogging the floor here. Any other SSRU members have questions or comments?
Tom, I have a question or suggestion. Are we going to have to do some PR? I'm sure we're going to get some pushback of increasing the rates 11, 12%. When we get pushback just for increasing them with the CPI amounts.
Yes, sir, I understand that. I don't want to, that's probably not my question, but I do want to point out that the plan that we put together to date that we're going to revise, that 11% was only in the first year. And then thereafter, both systems were needing about a 3%. The combined system was in 3% a year thereafter.
Oh.
So 11% is to just get everything on a combined basis with the surcharge in place.
Don't get me wrong, I think this is long overdue, but we do get comments a lot from the customers.
The city has made some improvements with bringing on board some help with getting PR out there in a graphic kind of way. We need to make sure that we are letting our non-city residents know the benefit that they continue to receive. And also, the fact of the matter is our city residents are paying a 10% utility tax into a city fund, and non-city residents are paying a 6% into a city fund. And so, even though their rate is a little bit higher, they're paying less in a tax. And so in the end, there is no disadvantage. I mean, and the fact that we're having to defer those needed utility expansions in an area that's grown 22% over the last 10 years, I think educating everyone as to why that is going to be very important. And we can, once, there's a general consensus from the board and the council, we can start those conversations.
I think as we go along as an educational type thing and awareness that possibly just start in the little newsletter area that we put in some of the bills, start to get some of those facts out there, and so people don't get hit too hard with them. One thing, you mentioned changing the ordinance. I think it's about time probably for a complete review of that. If we wanted to put a committee or a mixture of people together on it, but I think we probably should update the ordinance on that. I really think we, as the utility board, need to be probably a little more closely involved. If I were to look to change anything, I believe we should meet more frequently going forward. Every 2 months, it's easy to lose touch and to not be aware of some of the changes and so forth. So, and then if for some reason you have to cancel a meeting, then that's 4 months, and then everybody's out of the picture. So it would just be a recommendation from me going in. That was met with a lot of approval, sounds like.
I have no problem, Tom. I think it's probably a good idea.
Okay. What's the next step, Sam?
Well,
For the board itself.
yes. And so what we've shared with you today is the general plan for moving forward, which is to reduce the SSRU rate in order to be the same as the city rate, to increase the existing 6% surcharge to what is statutorily entitled to the city. At the same time, make sure that we're educating everyone that you know, our surrounding non-city customers are paying this rate, and so that everyone understands they're not at a disadvantage and they're still paying the regional average, and certainly below what is the state average, and start educating them, work with the council on kind of a temporary budget while we're adopting these policies, and work maybe towards a seat increase that would be effective for one, and then the adjustment to the surcharge, which would allow us to do the $7 million catch-up and capital improvements, just, you know, sometime this fall, I suppose, ideally. And so we would work towards that. The city council have a meeting at 4 where we'll be introducing this information to them as well. And we also have their, you know, just general acceptance of those next steps. Then the city staff will continue to work with Raftellus, and then we'll bring you back more specifics next month as you're looking at your budget.
So, and Samantha, if I could add a particular to that revised set of numbers, since we've already gone through the exercise, we have a lot of headwind behind us, but the information we'll need regarding Restore and the timing of getting that information will be critical to how quickly we can revise everything.
Understood. And last week, of course, on the heels of that very positive Restore Council meeting, I spoke with the county administrator. They're trying to get those answers for us from the U.S. Treasury so that we can better understand when we would be able to expect to draw down on those funds and whether there's a reimbursement that would even be possible. So we understand you're sitting on go in order to revise the funding plan and potentially the impact fee calculation. So we're working towards that.
Very good. Thank you.
I guess I had a kind of an upfront copy of the presentation, and I noticed that with the changes that didn't follow the script too well, would we be able to get a hard copy of the changed presentation? It's a PowerPoint.
Yes, sir. You received a very a rough draft sneak peek that was drafted prior to the Restore Council meeting last week. And right. So that is the reason for some of those changes. But we can, Leslie, our city clerk, can forward the PowerPoint today out to the members.
Okay, good.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that report you got was actually the more detailed proposal that we're gonna have to revise.
So where does that put us?
Well, again, it sounds like everyone is, I'm hearing from Terry and, you know, Steve, Flint, that everybody's kind of chewing on the information that they have heard today. I don't hear any significant concerns. I would be surprised, quite frankly, because the SSRU is the one who has been sounding the alarms now for several years about the lack of capital reserves. And certainly, as we have seen these emergency repairs to lift stations and otherwise, I mean, this is the need, obviously, for a new business plan is not surprising to anyone. But I'm also hearing the understanding that the surcharge differential coming back into the fund for those improvements is being generally accepted. And so we'll work towards putting something together, and we'll bring that back to you, you know, in July for your further review.
Okay. This was very well put together, especially with the changes you had to make at the last minute. So I thought it was very informative.
Thank you.
Good to be able to refer back to.
I can tell you they handled it in stride, which I was a little surprised. They were ready to go, and I called them with a curveball. So thank you for that, Henry, to you and your team.
Thank you, and I'll pass that on to everyone.
Okay. What do we have next? Any board members with any questions, concerns?
I don't have any.
Okay.
Sam, Smith, I do have a question.
Yeah.
Is the reclaim situation of all the documents and agreements been formally signed and notarized, or whatever you want to call it?
Yes, great question. So the San Rosa County and Highland Park Water Systems and the city have all executed the memorandum of agreement, which was sent to the Northwest Florida Water Management District. The 5-year strategic plan that spells out how $10 million in funding will be split between the 3 utilities for the interconnects in order to expand reclaim. That has been fully drafted by the Emerald Coast Planning Council, and it was accepted by Northwest Florida Water Management District. So that's all very exciting. That, of course, was why we were, you know, able to share a very compelling story for regional reclaim with the Restore Council, because the pipes are useless if the Tiger Point plant does not expand. Obviously, you know, priority one is hooking to Highland of our water system so we can get that additional reclaim in addition to our expansion and provide it to our existing neighborhoods, especially Woodlawn and the area to the east. And so we expect that these, you know, within the next 12 months, we're going to be under construction, especially with the expansion of the treatment plant, certainly in the next 12 to 24.
Okay, thank you.
Samantha, if I could, I just would like to add a special acknowledgement to Nick. I know today he just ran the slideshow for me, but after we received your call last week, we were anxious to get things moving forward. And I woke up Friday morning with an email from Nick at approximately 2 in the morning. So he was the guy that really responded here. So when you give credit to Raftalis, Nick deserves a lot of it because of his efforts to respond quickly.
Thank you, Henry.
And as you can tell, I've got a lot of gray hair, so hopefully in the future, Nick will eventually be your guy. So.
Great, and we don't plan on you going very far, so we're glad to hear that. And for the members of the SSRU, we asked Henry and Nick and their team if on an annual basis, moving forward, they can help consult during the development of the budget so that we don't get to a situation where maybe we have some unexpected, cost and there is a chasm in year 2 or year 3 that takes us off from our plan. So because they have helped us in develop that ultimately the SSRU is going to consider and make a recommendation, we want to make sure that everything that's being anticipated, CIP, operating costs, and otherwise, that we don't go too far astray from that, in years 2 and 3, once you get to kind of like the middle of the road with the new business plan. So we were very pleased to hear that they're able to do that and that you'll have that consultation moving forward.
Oftentimes after we do a comprehensive study like that, it sometimes does get set on the shelf. And, but most of our clients that are really, you think about what you spend each year on an audit looking backwards. We do like working with clients that on an annual basis at budget time, we'll give you a new rolling 5 years. It's a lot more cost effective, obviously, than starting from scratch, but it does help you manage the process. And again, your staff is so involved in day-to-day stuff that they don't have the time sometimes to step back and look at it. So we appreciate the opportunity to help.
Okay. Anything else?
No, sir.
We stand adjourned, and I thank you again for taking your time out of a busy day.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.